welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a Mandarin duck. As always, I'm using a Wacom Mentos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, here is the Mandarin duck. These guys are super colorful, as you can see from my color swatches down here. So they've got some orange through here, orange-brown, some white, into a reddish-orange down here, some purple. They've got some green going into blue, going into red, red beak with a white tip. I mean, very, very colorful birds. I thought it'd be fun to do one of them. So I'm going to get started with the orange by the face. Now, some of this transitions into white, but this is just the sketch layer, right? So in the sketch layer, we're just kind of drawing out the feathers in the direction that I think that they're going. And as I draw, I'm going to do one stroke, and one in between, right? So always kind of layering it up in between. Here it's swooping up. Now, I probably don't have to worry about it as much here as far as white with orange. When we get to highlights and shadows, this will be something I need to taper off the orange into white. But as we're sketching it, not as important because it's just going to be these sort of lighter strokes. Making sure that the feathers make sense in the direction that everything's going, right? So as it comes down, you know, we have this swoop happening. But inevitably, as it comes down like this way, the feathers would be kind of changing that direction just a little bit because you have the face going a slightly different direction. So being mindful. Nice long feathers. I don't think, especially down in here, usually I try to keep the strokes the length that they are in the animal itself, but in this case, I don't know that they're all that short. So, okay, so I'm actually going to go ahead and do, you can see I've changed the green a couple times. It's because I want it light enough. So usually I choose a mid-tone gray, which is right in here in order for it to show up nicely on a dark background. So I've chosen a slightly lighter green than it would be, and that's going to be in here. And that's just going to come up. Same thing though. We're just kind of coming straight up with those strokes in between. And then just like with the orange, this is a fade point between the green and the blue. And there's actually a little bit of green down this back side. If we can see it in the behind the orange feathers poking out here. A lot of color changes, which means the file might end up being a little bigger, but we'll see. All right, still following that line up, right? Still matching where that green was, putting the blue stroke in between and following that line of his head as it comes up. And just pushing it up. And then again, we have that transition point as blue kind of transitions into red. It's a lot of color changes for this guy. And so we have that red coming down. And then of course there'll be white as well. Now, one way to minimize how much color changing happens is I could reuse some of these colors. I have a different red for the beak, but maybe it'd be smarter to instead have the same red for the beak as I have for the back of the head here. Minimize it just a little bit. In fact, I think I might, so we'll keep on that with the beak. Don't want the file to be crazy. Beak, just like the feathers, you know, there's no real size or length of stroke required. I should say the beak, unlike the feathers. But the feathers here are so long, it really is going to where I'm naturally ending it. Following the contour of how I think the beak is going, though. So that's still important, is matching that contour. And then he's got his nose here. This will help make it more consistent too. Adding in colors to balance out where they show up in other places, not necessarily a bad idea, although both of those strokes were a little overzealous. It's fine on the feathers to be a little overzealous and go outside the range. That's perfectly natural. On sharper edges, you can a little bit, but not excessively. If it's too much, you know to look out of place. If we're thinking something's supposed to be smooth, and what we're seeing is something that's not smooth, we'll notice that. All right. Now we've got this kind of orangish, longer set of feathers down in here. These are nice and long. And they swoop up at the cheek and then down. Again, it doesn't matter if it goes off the edge here, because feathers would, just like fur would, depending. I mean, if it's wet, maybe not, but bringing this all the way down. And again, it makes it a little quicker because it's nice and long. And then we'll run it into this purple down here. But that is a distinct change as opposed to up here where it blends. The purple is an actual changeover that happens. Okay. Now I'll do that purple. I wasn't going to do it. I was going to cut it here, but it kind of makes it look a little strange, so I had to add in the purple in order to help fill it out. But very lightly, so I'm probably, when we get down in here when we're adding highlights and shadows, probably not going to do a ton. I'm going to want it to kind of lightly blend in. Right, and then we just bring it down. Because it looks much more appealing to us when something ends this way rather than ends this way. Okay. And now for the white, I think that's the last thing. And then we'll get on to the highlights. White, I typically choose an off-white always, right? It's this kind of off-whitish color. I very rarely go with a pure white. What's nice about this bird, right, is he's got some nice white like surrounding this edge, depending on the angle, which is why I have his head turned this way, as you get some of that white over here. To make sure in the event this green turns out too dark, you still get a burst that is very clearly nice and bright. Still matching how the other feathers are going. Right, so we have this coming up, so we're matching all of that. Coming down over here. Okay, now around the eye, we need to be a bit more careful. We're drawn to eyes. It's the first thing that we look at as people, as humans. I just say that, and then I literally tapped my pencil or stylus in his eye. So you notice I'm being careful as I come around. But we get to this side and it's going to loop back off. Just like this comes up. Birds typically will do this where you see that connection point happening right there. Same thing as the others though, just following this contour. This would be blended into here. And rotating down. You notice I flatten that out once I get to where that bottom would kick in, following that rotation we already have. It's okay if it's not perfect. And it's okay if it pushes into the other colors where maybe it's not lined up right. Some feathers go over another. But probably not like that. This is probably behind the other. And then bring that white down. Oh, and then the white on his nose. Still following that contour. Right, and it's going to angle down here. So his nose can be a kicking off point to make sure there's no line conflicts as you do that. Go to that tip and then rotate it back. All right, so that's where it leaves us. They're just such striking birds. Okay. Actually going to go ahead and start with the white. That's probably going to be the easiest thing to do. So going to have the light source coming from above and to the right, especially in this case, right, he's turned this way. So with the light source coming from over here, you have all of this that'll be in highlight, which is great. If it's behind, you know, you're going to have a silhouette of light, but this will be in shadow, which isn't great for your subject. And if it's next to, you're going to have this extreme highlight, and any dents or indentations or anything else will have this extremeness to it. So this might all be in highlight, but then it would transition into an extreme shadow when we got to the front. So not ideal. So this is an ideal location for light source above and to the right. All edges will still be in shadow. What I'm going to do first is this side over here, because this is definitely in shadow, and when I'm doing that, I'm not putting full pin pressure. So this is just light pin pressure, just sort of filling in what's already over here. And if I want to, you know, we can re-angle or add some, or, you know, have a little bit coming up. On this side, we're going to be dealing with most of the white in highlight, in which case we're actually going to be putting in full pin pressure, right? And you can see that difference. Pretty dramatic. Where we rotate around. And they have that little strip by the face. As we bring that down. Now, as we come under the beak, based on the direction of the light source, this white won't really be in shadow. If it went any further under, it would be. Some of this orangish over here will be, but the white connecting under here, not as much. Again, that light source coming in from over here, so my shadow off of the beak is going to be more in that direction. And then back up to here. And I am fading the white through here because I have the orange to add. I want to make sure that shows up and blends. So just sort of tapering off how hard I'm putting that pin pressure where there's that blending, and then going right back into full pin pressure as I come out of where that was happening. Right, all of this is full pin pressure. And then again, being careful by the eye as we get closer to it, being mindful. So there will be some shadowing by the eye. You know, light source coming from above and to the right, so you're going to have a little against the eye itself over here. It's on the side of the light source as the eye dips into the eye, as I guess the feathers dip into the eye. And then the same thing for above, as it's doing the same thing. And then when you get to this other side, you're going to have where that light source is now doing the opposite, where it's coming out of the eye, that light source is kicking back in and catching the light. Right, so all of that is full pin pressure. Making sure that's nice and clean. And then just following that contour. Trying to think if there's anything else that'll be unique. When we get over here, might be just enough to create just a little bit of shadow. So let me go ahead and fill that in so I have that kind of marked, and then I'll put that full pin pressure back in. Alright, so the rest of his head in white, or I should say the rest of the white feathers against his head, will be highlight. And it's okay, again, right, some of this is pushing into that red. That's okay. That'll make it look more natural. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of this white, and I will be back. Alright, now we have the beak, so we have this back that'll be in shadow, so it's light pin pressure, making sure the edge is nice and straight. And then the tip of the beak is going to be in shadow, right? Because that's going underneath, as well as the bottom. So all of that is in shadow. And we're going to have this come over just a little bit, and then have the rest of this in highlight. So that's back to that full pin pressure. Gives us a little bit of a runway, although I'm also trying to taper off my pin pressure as I come close to the edge of where the shadows and the highlights are. Alright. So, there's the white. It's a nice big pop of color there. I'm going to go ahead and do the green. And then you'll notice I obsessively check if I'm on the right layer, so I've had bad experiences. Alright, so at some point in this blue-green, there's going to be a transition from highlight to shadow. And whatever I do in one, I need to be consistent into the other. So I'm going to do this side in shadow, right? The side it's connected into that white. Since the white didn't transition to highlight, the green can't either. So we'll do a little bit of shadowing across. Figuring that the light source coming from above and to the right, his face is turned just that little bit to the other side, but there should still be enough light coming over that it catches. And then of course we have, this blended section where both colors kind of meet in the middle. And that I'm going to do light pin pressure all the way across, because as it blends it's going to be easier to build it up when they're both drawn lightly. Okay, so I'm going to have full pin pressure and highlight over here, and I think I'm going to transition it where I've now delineated that. So this runs right into that. Full pin pressure, tapering into that shadowed section. It'll look different once we start laying other colors on top, but I want to make sure that I don't accidentally make it too sudden or jarring. Bringing that over, and then we'll taper that off. We want it to blend in, so we don't want it to look like, this is highlight and this is shadow. We want it to be a bit more subtle than that. So just sort of, lightly when I'm doing this in this blended section, not putting more pin pressure, I'm just putting more strokes, and more strokes will also lighten it up. So that'll help give it that blended effect. We'll have to do the same thing to the blue at the same point. So whatever we do on this side, we'll need to do once we push into that other color. Alright, so now we have that blue. So same thing, we have the shadow, all edges are in shadow, so we have that shadow over here. And then this transition point where blue and green mix together. So I'm going to pull that blue down into where that green is. You can see, making sure that they blend. Should create a nice blended effect and build up the color a bit, because now you're going to have two colors pushing into it. All edges are in shadow, so we have, the top of the head now to worry about, which you have the light beaming down on them. So that won't be a deep shadow. Alright, now we start that transition somewhere around here into the green. So I need this much to be in shadow with the blue. Before we push it into highlight. Give myself a little bit of an extra runway. Okay, now this is highlight, so now that's full pin pressure. Again, blending that down into where the blend is happening. I don't want that to be jarring. And then the white feathers are in front of the blue here, so where it's poking up, right, I need to let those feathers stand. And then just like with the green and that orange down there, there's a transition point into that red. So light pin pressure as we transition through here. And then back to full pin pressure as we bring it back down. And we want all of the edges, right? This edge up here, want to make sure that also is also nice and blended. Okay. So now that we're to this edge, I'm going to back off my pin pressure and use more strokes to fill in the gaps rather than more pin pressure to fill in the gaps. It gives me a little bit more control. Make sure I start that transition into shadow at the same point. Right. Okay. There we go so far. Might come back in with more of the green and layer that on top, just very lightly on that blue. For now, I think it works. Okay. I'm going to do that orange. That's against the face. So we have this blending up in here. Again, that light pin pressure as I blend it. Into full pin pressure on its own. But I don't want the blend to look out of place, so making sure this looks nice and blendy. And the rest of this orange should be in highlight. And just like everything else, just following the contours we've already done, right? And we have that sort of mixing of lines over here. So we have some coming like looping out, some looping around. So this is where that sketching step really comes in handy, because now I don't have to think about where those lines are going. I already know. I've already sketched it out, so I know I won't have any line conflicts because I've already done this. I'm going to finish up the orange and I will be right back. All right. Now we have the red down the back of the head and on the beak. I'm going to do back of the head first. And then of course we have where we're blended in. All edges in shadow, so a good portion of this red's going to be in shadow over here. Doesn't hurt to have some feathers push off the back. But again, that's that light pin pressure. You can see I'm angling it out. That gives some realistic look. Unless you want it to look more wet and slick, in which case you can do that too, and it's okay if it doesn't come off the back of the head. Bring that down. And then we're going to have highlight. And that's back to full pin pressure, making sure there's not a lot of space here, that we blend it in nicely. Don't want that drawing transition. We don't have a lot of room to make it work. You can have a few pieces out of place, right? We have like this coming off the back. It's okay if a little bit of highlight pushes out, but overall, this needs to transition into shadow before it gets to that edge. So highlight against the white, quickly transitioning into shadow as it comes to the edge. These guys are so colorful. I love it. Push some of that down. All right. Might be a little out of place. Okay. I like pulling back because it can give me an idea of how something's looking like. It looks like a shadow just kind of runs into the top of his head here. I'll make sure that this is a nice bright highlight. And that's why I always pull back, is sometimes you see things from further away than you do when you're right up on it. And then sometimes you fix one thing and it makes another thing look out of place. Okay. All right. Now we have the beak. So this edge, right, shadow, because it's just like the tip of the beak, it's on that far side, it's rounding away. There is no real blending happening here, so we don't have to worry about that. And then again, underneath, same thing, you have shadow because, well, it's underneath. And it would, because it's rounding away. So light pin pressure. Making sure everything looks nice and straight is important too. Also being careful, if you accidentally add too many lines, you will brighten it up. That's why it's so effective to use that way when I'm doing shadows, is if you add more lines, it does the same thing as adding more pin pressure. So if you're having trouble like drawing in a spot, sometimes I'll have to zoom in because I draw on it so much it ends up accidentally brightening it up. I was getting close a moment ago, that's why I mentioned that. Almost accidentally creating a highlight where there should not be. All right, I'll bring this over just a little bit more. I want this to line up what's happening here. Giving myself enough runway to do that. And then also keeping in mind that there's a nostril here, so light source coming from above and to the right. Means that we're going to have some shadowing right around here where the nostril's dipping down or in, and then some highlighting on the opposite of that where the nostril's coming out. And then the rest of this is in highlight. Just connecting that in, being careful because the nostril, so we would notice if it's out of place. Can't like put a line through it like we would see that. Making sure it looks nice and like straight there. Tapering in my highlight around that shadow. Yeah. And then otherwise, the rest of this should be highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in and be right back. All right. Now you can see that, right, the shadow is pretty jarring on both sides, and we don't want that. This is what I mean when it's so jarring. No good. So again, just like before, we're going to take that and lightly do light strokes, just adding more strokes in and brightening up that transition so that it flows into shadow instead of just suddenly is in shadow. And see just that little bit, and now you have a nice transition up, so we'll do the same thing down. Just more strokes. Very quick and easy to brighten up by adding more strokes. Also gives me more control, so sometimes I opt to do that just because I have more control when I'm doing that. All right. There we go. And now for his darker orange feathers, we're going to have some shadowing happening here. All right, so this whole side will be shadow, right? It's far away. Making sure it's a clean line to the beak. So this all the way down, right? It's on the opposite side of the light source, so of course this would be in shadow. Now, light source coming from above and to the right, right? And so this is a trick when you're trying to sort that out. If my angle is this, then I follow that same angle here, which tells me that my shadow underneath the beak comes down this way. Right, an object's going to match the same angle that your light source is. Crossover feathers, doesn't have to be perfectly aligned. So that should be the shadow under the beak. And then we have a shadow on this back side. I realize I forgot that grain. We'll go back to it. Because all edges are in shadow, but it's not a very big one. Just a little bit, just like the tips. Nice long feathers, so it's all right that they're a little bit more messy. And bring that down. Now here's what I'm debating a little bit. This fluff sticks out more than the purple. I'm thinking I should do a shadow all the way around, right? Because this red fluff here, this orange fluff, kind of sticks out a bit before it kind of goes down a bit. I'm giving myself a runway, that's why it's so big. It shouldn't stay that big. But that means that all of these edges, the entire thing should be in shadow. And then that purple is going to have a little bit of shadowing against the orange. I don't know why my voice cracked there. It's going to have a little bit of shadowing by the orange where, you know, that orange, these orange feathers are kind of blocking the purple underneath. And then full pin pressure. Now I'm going to be actually taking some of this lighter orange and mixing into this darker, like little streaks of feathers, but right now, just full pin pressure. Already filled in where all the shadows would be, right? So over here even would be full pin pressure, right up to the edge of that beak. Because until it tucks under, light source would still be hitting it. Come down. Making sure it blends though. But otherwise, full pin pressure. And then I'm going to go ahead and finish up this orange, and I will be back. All right. So we're going to blend some of this in a bit better. Even though that's into shadow, we don't want that to look jarring, even still. And then down into here, same thing. We're going to get a little heavy-handed, so we're going to make that a little smoother. That's probably fine. And then down in here, I taper it off. Just making sure I fix up the edge. Nice and neat. Doesn't have to be too close, just if it looks a little off to me, I know it'll look off to others. So if something doesn't look right, I'll fill it in until it does. Okay. Now, I forgot some of that green. So I'm gonna go find it. Yeah. Layer order can be important, right? This little bit of green is behind the red, or this orangish red, so I want to make sure that's where it stays. So I'm going to keep that layer order the same, but this would be full pin pressure, the same as that other green from the front. All right, there we go. Okay, so and come back up here and take this guy. And what this should do is taper off some of this orange a bit by pulling in this lighter orange. Not fully, but almost as like a highlight on various feathers. Not a lot. Should just kind of be, starts small and then kind of extends longer and longer. Almost like these individual lines, which you can put a couple of lines on the same spot and it'll still kind of have that individuality to it. It'll make it look a little bit more feather-like, that it's not perfectly clean. Let me get this sketch layer off. So it just adds some detail, which is kind of nice. And I think they do have this little bit. Oh, that's probably too far down. It doesn't go all the way down. I might be pulling a little bit much. And I don't know if it's actually that the feathers are a little different there or what is exactly is happening, but sometimes you can kind of see this on them. So I thought it would be good, like a good little thing to add. Get kind of this streaky, feathery look to it because of that. I'll add just a little bit more down, but less pin pressure. And it creates kind of a little bit of a streak effect that then goes away outside of the highlight. Okay. And we have the purple. So the purple, you know, the body is sort of looping over. I'm going to do the purple in shadow because there's a lot working against it. One, it's coming up to an edge, and sometimes the easiest way to denote that is to fade it instead of having a harsh transition. And two, I think some of the orange here is blocking some of the purple, so it also is going to have, well, it'll have some highlight and I'll be pulling some of that in, but not a lot, just kind of in the area that's going to be, you know, middle section here where it's got a lot of real estate to work with. And it's okay, again, if it's not perfectly straight here, because this isn't really an edge. Like, we're creating an edge. So at this point, it's how you want your composition to end. That's why I usually do heads, is the composition ends nice and neat for me. But it's still a good idea to know how to kind of cut a composition when that won't work, which is true for a lot of birds, especially if I turn their heads to the side. You know, we pull it down a little bit further. And certain angles, as I mentioned before, just look better to us. And so it's okay, this is a little messier, because I don't want that to be a perfectly straight thing. Because it's not, this would be continuing on, in theory. Okay. So if I add a little bit of highlighting to this, it's going to be right through in here. I'm not going to add much. Just enough to indicate there's some highlights and shadows happening. which can add a lot to a composition. So, you know, if you think, it's probably fine, adding highlights or shadows to something, even if you think it doesn't need it, can sometimes be really helpful at making something stand out in a certain kind of way. Because now we can play a little bit with this, how far down this highlighting comes, which will make it look a little bit better too. And with the feathers, you know, it's feathers pushing into place, right? So that wouldn't be uniform either, right where that shadow's kicking in up top. There we go. Alrighty. He's pretty cute and very colorful. So I'm gonna add just a little bit more of this orange. And then we'll do the eye. Their eyes are pretty dark, so that'll probably be pretty straightforward. Make sure I have a layer to go to. Okay, so I'm just gonna, you know, bolster this up just a little bit. Okay, just to bring that a little bit more into highlight as it goes over. And then maybe pull it down just a little bit more as well. Okay. Now, since I have this, I'm also going to lightly fade this on top of the white. And then I'm going to take the white and fade it back. And just help blend it a little bit. Not putting a lot of pin pressure as I do that. And I'm filling this little bit of a gap. Okay. Okay, now for the eye. So their eyes are pretty dark. No matter how much I look at them or try to find more information, I'm imagining their eyes are brown, and I could draw them brown, but they are so dark in every picture I see of them that what we're going to do instead is just add a light flare. So that's relatively easy. So typically when I'm doing that, I'm going to draw a little light flare on the side of the light source. I'm going to use the lasso tool. And because I don't have a circle of an eye to work with, I'm not going to use the elliptical Mach-E tool, which is what I usually do. And I'm going to do kind of a reversed teardrop shape. It's kind of in the shape of the eye, which I messed up a little bit there, so don't do what I just did. Right, I want this curving and then coming back up. Curving a little bit better than that. Curving, kind of around, and then back up. Yeah, there we go. And then making sure we're on the right layer, and then filling that with the foreground color. There we go. If you want, you know, you can have like feathers interfering. I don't know that he really has enough feathers to do that right there. What I am going to fix though is just this little spot down here. Make his eye more round. You know, in some cases with critters and things, you can have feathers pushing in. I don't know that based on the angle of that, he would really have feathers pushing in like that. So, yeah, I think that'll do it. Alright, so that is how you draw a mandarin duck. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.